In this module, we're going to consider design. However, I'm going to use a very simple subject. It will be a wave coming in on the beach. So we get that three-dimensionality of a cylindrical wave. It's just a big cylinder. And how do we shade that? And the texture of the sand as it is in contrast to the water and the spray of the wave. Later, we'll add a few little birds that play in and out with the waves as it comes in and leaves. We're going to work with different edges, some sharp, clear-cut edges or fading edges, which are called lost edges. People call this the sharp edges, found edges, and the soft ones, lost edges. So when they talk about lost and found edges, that's what they're talking about. We'll also consider aerial perspective. What is that? That's atmospheric perspective, so that things in the distance are a little more blue and hazy, and the things that are closer have brighter color and more contrast. We will also work with the thin or thick paint. If you want a lighter color in watercolor, you need to add more water. It becomes more transparent and more spread out that way. The particles spread out over the paper. Thicker paint will create a darker value. We don't want to add black. We can add more of a dark paint, a dark color into our paint, but by making it a little bit thicker, it will make it darker and a little less transparent. We don't want to make it so thick that it's still not somewhat transparent, but there's a difference between thick transparent and very thin transparent. So we'll play with that. This is my image I'm working with today. It's a painting I did from a photo of a wave. I exaggerated the wave somewhat. I added in from another photograph the birds. I've adjusted the water in the background to make it more dramatic and make this wave pop up. It was not actually that dark, but for this painting, as a design element, I thought it worked better. So you can break the rules. You can step away from a photograph. You can change some of the elements to make it work better for your painting. Do remember that photos see everything equally, and they flatten out the images, and they always add contrast to the background and the foreground. So that's why I very rarely paint from a photograph, because it is not giving me true information as if I were on location and painting right there. So use the photo as a tool, but don't copy it. Please don't copy it. I don't have the original photo for this, but we'll work from this image, and that's okay to do. Now the first thing we do, I did happen to take this photo of the painting, and I did a little print from it. And from that print, I am going to take just some plain paper. This is some copier paper. You don't need to have fancy sketchbook paper. You've seen me with my sketchbooks before, but today let's try something different. So I am looking at this. I can quickly sketch a couple little thumbnails, as I've talked about before. Now this pencil, it's a very hard, so a very light pencil. It's a 4H. It's quite hard. You can't see it very well on the video. And if I were going to draw on here, this is the one I would use with a very, very light touch, because you don't want your pencil to dent the paper microscopically, because if it dents the paper, then the paint is going to settle into that little dent. What we want to do is just very lightly skim across the top enough so we can see some sort of the image. But for my little value sketch, and my checking things out, I'm going to use a darker pencil. I don't use this to put on my watercolor paper, but you'll see it better. So here's just an idea of for my thumbnails. If you notice, the ratio of the height and the length of these rectangles are about the same as for my paper here. If I wanted to make a vertical painting, I would not create a horizontal sketch, nor would I create a square sketch. If I want a square sketch, I'll have a square painting. So try to make your sketches fit the format of your paper. Horizontal, vertical, square, long, thin. This is a very normal size. Make that very clear and decide. So we won't use this one. Quickly, I'm looking at, pretend this is a photo. This is almost, to me, a little too far down. It's about at thirds. We talked about dividing something into thirds. I don't want that. I want to bring it up a little more. So my horizon is going to be higher, and be sure it's horizontal. The peak of this wave is almost smack dab in the middle of the paper. I want to throw that off to a side a little bit more. So just very lightly, I'm going to sketch in. So I think my wave is going to be more over here with the foam. And I'm thinking with lines, I'm not actually going to make lines, but my brush strokes will be that upsweep of the wave as it's coming up, and then it curls here in a cylindrical shape and creates the foam at the top. So you can see that. And this, because it's coming up underneath and it's a cylinder, there's going to be shadow underneath that cylinder, underneath that foam. And then the diagonal of the seashore running across. I use a diagonal because if I do it straight across, it's kind of boring. I mean, we have to do that with the horizon, yes. But let's make the seashore at an oblique angle. It makes it more interesting. And then the water is running off the beach back to the ocean. So here, very quickly, I can get an idea value-wise where my darks are going to be. I want to do middle dark here, kind of a middle dark right in this area. My sky will be softer. So the brightest part of my painting is going to be that foamy area. So if you're not comfortable, if you want to try bringing the horizon down, then you can do that. There's the wave. Here's the beach. And you can have more sky. But this painting, we want to focus on the wave. So we want that in an area where it really, really stands out. Here it doesn't stand out as much. It starts fighting with the sky. Half of it is the wave, half of it is the sky. So keep those things in mind. So I can work off of this sketch. I don't have to copy this. I want this as my original idea, but I'm going to set this aside and basically work from my little sketch. We need to relax. Remember, watercolor partially has a mind of its own. You're going to control it somewhat, but not too much. Set that off to my side here. Here's my note to remind myself that I'm working with a balance of water. Do I want it gloss, wet in wet, sheen, so it's like wet in semi-wet, matte where it is kind of wet or dry into a matte amount of water, and the dry paper. So remember to look in the light at an oblique angle to see which. Today I am working on rough Arches paper. This paper is on a pad. You can see it's a pre-glued pad. It comes this way as opposed to a single sheet which I would tape down to a surface. I have my sketch to the side. I bring in my little note about the balance of water to paint that we talked about in the introductory videos. I'm going to consider working top to bottom and thin to thick paint, and basically light to dark. And I want to control these elements so it works well with the image of my wave. And remember, think ahead, plan ahead, as we have with the sketch and all. Make a commitment when you put down, once you've mixed your paint and you get ready to put that brush to paper and drop the paint into there, make a good decision and then commit to it and leave it alone for the most part. Another consideration is color, of course. Since this is the ocean, I think we're going to stay basically in an analogous painting. So we're going to stay in the blues and the violet blues and the green blue section with a hint of the complements, which would be in the yellow orange, and that's going to be very soft, very light in the sand. Color theory is another whole aspect that I will talk about in another course. I've made a decision. I want a fairly high horizon line. I'm going to grab any straight edge. Here's just a piece of paper. I am going to make sure it's even on both sides so that my line is very straight. Draw that in very lightly. I know you can't see it, but I can. And that's all right. I've already shown you basically what's going on with it. I want the peak of my wave somewhere in this area, and I'll kind of keep that in my mind. The wave is going to come up and curl and come down. This will be my spray area, where the foam of the wave is falling over. And then my shoreline will be somewhere here. When the water goes out, it goes out somewhat irregularly. So that's kind of what we're going to think about. Where do we start? There are so many ways of painting this that you can start almost any place. But since we're working light to dark, that's how I'm going to start. I want to get a really good sense of the spray of this wave in here. My approach today is going to be taking my rough spray bottle and let me see if it shows here a little bit. If I take this, test it to the side, spray on this paper. Nope, still doesn't show. I've got to find a surface that shows on. All right. My rough spray bottle, I'm going to spray around that white area, around the edges of it, trying to kind of follow the shape of the wave, but not making it totally saturated. And I look into it in the light. I don't want it totally saturated because I want the texture to pick up my paint and get that feeling of a spray, because I did spray. I'm going to take this round brush into my water. Don't know if you can see that. And let's pick out a color. While it's quite very wet, so I'm kind of waiting for it to dry. I'm going to pick up some of this phthalo blue right there. Make a little pile of it on my palette. Go into my ultramarine, get a nice glob of that, make a little pile of that on my palette, make sure the particles are well dissolved. I'm also going to pick up a little cerulean, so we see that we're staying in that blue family. The cerulean is toward the greens. This is a middle blue, and this is a cooler blue. And of course, to neutralize it, I'm going to use one of my either burnt sienna or my burnt sienna here, the rust colored, or the burnt umber. Let's start with the sky. We talked about starting top to bottom, right? Thin to thick. So I'm going to start with a little of the cerulean blue for the sky. And I might prepare, I'm going to keep this very light at this point. I'm going to keep my eye on that horizon line, and it's dried over at this area. I got to move this because that's going to get wet. If you notice, I'm just spraying up here. I'm not bringing it down into here right now. And I want to stay right on that horizon line, make a nice clear line. And as I come closer to the wave, let it break up. So now I'm just lightly dabbling in here. Let's change the color slightly. We'll grab a little of that ultramarine blue, mix it in until it looks like a good color. Bring that down in. The wave is obliterating, it's over the horizon line. You can't see the horizon line behind the wave. I want a nice clear horizon line there. A little more of that blue. Coming down in here, back to the horizon line, trying to keep it straight. Nice. Jumping around where I want that spray to be. I want to pick up a little warmth in that sky. That became very gray. I'm not sure what's there. So before, see how I looked at that? I'm not going to use that. It's too gray. So I'm going to throw in a little pink just for variety up in that sky. A little on this side too. Just very quickly, almost instinctively. I want this to be a little more dotted, so I'm going to try to put a light spray there to break that up a bit. Okay. I can see when I look at this obliquely that there's a couple of spots where there's some dots on my paper. And I can just touch those with my brush, the very, very tip of my brush, and it will spread out in an irregular pattern where the water naturally has dropped from my spray. All right, now I need to leave the horizon line alone, because if I touch this now and try to put in water here that's in the ocean, that will bleed up into that sky, and I don't want that. Don't want that at all. I've paused to think. I'm keeping an eye on the parts that are drying in case I need any little minor adjustments while this is happening. I think since I have some light and I'm working light to darker, I am going to bring in some of the lighter areas of the water. So again, I have the cerulean because it's reflecting the sky, but I'm going to add a little more depth with this blue. A little more water. Notice when I go to pick up water, I barely touch it with the tip of my brush. I don't dunk the whole brush in because that totally affects it. Because there's already water in the brush, it acts as a sponge to just suck up some of that water, and it's probably enough. So lighter water in here, it's swishing up. I'm thinking about the shape of the wave. It's darker than I expected. Lighten it up a little bit. Curve it around. A little more water on my brush. You can see how there's some, this is on dry paper because the spray didn't reach there. I don't want a geometric line there, so I'm going to touch it to soften that up. Maybe a little lighter here as it's coming down. Notice how flat I'm lying my brush here to come across there. So where it's drier, it skips across. And there's foam at the edge of the water where the water touches the sand. Now, because this area is away from the sky and I'm waiting for that to dry, I can keep working this area. Vary the color a little bit. Let your brush skip around. I want some more spray here. Right in this area, again, I don't want a sharp line, so it's dried out somewhat. I need to add a little more spray across there. And look how it just pulls that paint up into it. Watch me drop. I'm going to go with a little more dramatic paint, but I got to pick up some more paint. And watch how it spreads. See it spread out? It just kind of spreads out, and it creates a very natural look. I like that in there. I don't want to mess it up too much. I do need more deepness in here because this is where that foam is coming over and it's creating a shadow under that wave. I want to gray this up a little bit, so I bring in my my extra paint that's on the edge so I can quickly gray that blue. Look at this. And always the sweep of that water. Anytime I do a long brush stroke, it's in the direction of the water sweeping up into the wave. It's being sucked up into that vortex. I don't want a lot of contrast on the edge of my paper. I'm just cleaning my brush now. Look at those natural blossoms that are happening here in the past. So exciting. All right, I need more paint before it dries too much in this area. I want that darker and deeper. I grab some of my ultramarine blue and some of the Salo as well, and let's try to drop some of that right in there. Turn my brush around, really saturate the brush with this. Let's make it a little more gray. Drop it in, let it do its own spreading. A little more down in here, secondary area. Now that's very kind of spotty. I don't really want that. I am going to remove some of the paint and the water from my brush by touching it to my sponge, and then I'm going to drag it down into the upsweep. See how naturally that's happening? It's just very natural, very easy, very soft. But it's working because I am kind of allowing the paint to do its job as I'm kind of doing my job. We're working in a partnership here. See how I'm letting this brush skip across in this area so that it looks like spotty, the drizzles of the wave. I'm going to add a hint with my green that I have. That's too green. Wash my brush, bring it in, add it into this area. As the light shines through the wave, it becomes more translucent in the tip top of that water, and you see more of a green. It's really fascinating. Whoop. Step back, take a look at it. Looking pretty good. I want to add a very light foamy area at the edge of this. I need dry paper. Just blot that up quickly. So I'm going to skim this across at the edge of the water where it touches the sand. Just almost laying my brush flat and watching it skip across there. Just barely touching the surface of the paper. This is still quite wet, so what I'm going to do now, because I want this to dry, I want to see where it's going, I might step away, but I just got another idea. Before I do that, I'm going to take the beveled edge of the end of my flat brush, and I'm going to scrape some highlights in here. The water always leaves tiny trails of foam. If I scrape at one point, I can lift the paint. If I scrape at another point, you can see I kind of scratch that. Then the water is going to settle down into that and create a darker line. So by knowing whether it's gloss, sheen, matte, or dry, you can control which lines. This is quite wet. I think it's going to create a line. Yep, it's going to create a line where the water settles into it. Look in the paper, into the light. I'm going to try to scrape this so it's white. And sometimes this just takes practice. Get one of your old pieces of scrap paper, play around with it. You can have some fun. You learn a lot this way. Edge of the water. Just adds variety in there. I want a little bit here too, but not as long. I want these lines to be different sizes, slightly different shapes. All right, now I'm going to step away and let this dry. A little blot there, too sharp an edge. Yeah, we'll let this dry for a bit. Now we're back and checking with the back of our finger how damp this is. I think this up here is dry enough. It's basically in my matte stage. It's still cool, so there's still water in the sky, but I think it's almost dry enough, so if I put a horizon line there, it's not going to bleed into it too much. Here is still quite wet, but that's okay. I want to work more into this area. Notice today I'm really not using my flat wash brush. I'm using mostly this round. It's a round number 10, silver black velvet. But anything that's a good round brush. You don't have to buy my brands. Just get something that works well and make sure that when you wet it in the water, and no matter what it looks like, when you tap it, and you tap it with your finger, it comes to a very nice point. That's important. Now I want to bring in the ocean water behind. I have to think about this. I know in reality that it's not much darker than the sky. But I'm looking at my other sketch and I like the fact that it was darker because it adds a design element, almost an abstract design element that's not quite real, but really helps emphasize this wave. So that's one aspect. We're talking about design. Before we do that, look at some of these wonderful, soft, foamy areas. Here, this right here is really nice. This has come across nicely. A couple of these lines I'm not happy with. They look a little contrived, but okay. So, water in the distance. It's going to be, this is kind of cerulean. It's going to be more in our ultra family, ultramarine blue, because it's distant, but I want it also a little more gray. So I take some of my dried paint to the side, just drag that in. Mix it around so it becomes a nice grayed blue. Let's just check this color. Looks pretty good. All right, again, horizon line, very straight on that line. And then I need to spray again quickly. I cover that, spray down around where I want the foam. Oh, I want some more foam down in this way too. There. And I want to take, oh, look at that. I accidentally went up into my sky, see? If I touch that quickly, hopefully, just press it, hold it, and lift it. Don't fiddle with it. You fiddle with it, you mess it up. Let's try to just bring that straight line back in. You know what that is now? It's an island in the distance. Okay, I'm thinking about the top side of the foam. Bring it down into here. Now water finds its surface, so all my lines will try to be horizontal. I'm going to get some softer areas there, and I'm going to leave it again for a little while. I see I got a couple drops when I did the spray up in this area, but that's okay. Again, what is it? Oh, islands. I got too much of a straight line of the foam coming across here, so I want to break this up a little more. I'm just going to drop in some of that same color, make this edge of the foam even smaller. As I'm looking at this, it doesn't look quite dark enough anymore. I've got to pick up some more paint and try to lay that in. Squint my eyes, check it out. All right, same on this side. I'm bracing my hand with my other hand. That was very wet, that's why I blotted it. Nice straight line at the horizon, and then let it find where that wetness is as I look at this at an oblique angle. Bring that across. Step back. This is not a good line here. Let's fix that. Let's see, the foam's coming around and sweeping up under that wave. While it's still wet on this side, it'll bleed in pretty well. So if you notice on this one, I want a stronger line here. I'm coming from the top of my painting. I can actually, if you need to, you can turn your paper. But I'm just going to come from the top since I'm working on a fairly small paper. I want to make a different shape there. Yeah, that's kind of fun. Whew, boy, that's coming right over there, isn't it? I'm going to take a paper towel, make an unusual shape. It's too regular right now. Scrunch it up really well. That looks kind of interesting. And blot. Remember, don't blot multiple times. Just once and hold it. Leave it. I'm going to drop in some irregular drops. Step back, take a look at this. I want a sharper line here. A sharper edge to emphasize this. And under this wave, I'm getting a line right here. I don't really want that. I'm just going to scrub it a little bit to get rid of that line. Move some of that paint around. I think I'll move some up into here as well. Step back, take a glance at it. Whoo, this is really coming around. It's like it hit something. It hit itself. Water runs into itself. You can go to the ocean and watch the water for hours and what it does against itself. It's fascinating. Fascinating. A little more color down in here. While it's still wet enough that that's going to bleed. Okay. Step back, take a look. This is a really odd shape right here. I mean, it might be something that happens, but I think I'll try to adjust that slightly. A little light spray right in that one spot, so I can use the natural flow of the paint in the water. Once you get used to playing with the paint, you can get used to how it, what it wants to do. It's like, you know, it's like playing with a child and you realize they start having a certain pattern to their play. The paint does too. And it takes us quite a while to learn and anticipate what that paint is going to do. Now while I'm doing this and I step back to look, I check all areas. How is this drying? How is this drying? That looks okay. I think I'll blot a little bit here, make a soft foam. This I'm not really pleased with. I'm going to add a little color into this right here. The swoop of that wave. That looks kind of neat. It's too clumped, so I need to drag it a bit more. Damp brush, drag it across. Yeah. There's more phthalo right there. I lost all my phthalo. I had to get it back. Think. You can draw in the air before you decide to set it down. Once you set it down, go with it. Touch the brush to water. I want this to set back a little bit. Foaminess here at the edge. On the tip of my brush now, those tendrils of color and water and foam as it goes up into the wave. I'm going to drop in some more in here. It was looking a little too man-made. Back and forth. Additive and subtractive. Put it in, take it out, move it around, and then leave it alone. I think this needs a little more change in that shape. Remember that odd shape that we had? More depth under there. I've got a lot of depth right here. I think I need a little more down into this area. Sometimes, you know, we're playing and it might not come out the way you want. It might come out differently. It might come out horribly. That's okay. Then we can let the paper dry, turn it over, and make another painting. That's kind of fun. I'm checking things over now. Just kind of looking around, seeing what's going on. Tip of the brush. Just the tip. Irregular patterns, always irregular. Blot it slightly so it doesn't look like a brush. And now let's get some sand in here. We talked about that being in the warm family as a kind of the complement of the analogous colors going on here. I'm pulling out some yellow ochre. That is way too much. And a little bit, maybe burnt sienna, because that will give it a warmth, very sand feeling. But it's very orange looking now. So let's pull in, we could pull in a little blue or green. I'm going to pull in the green because I've got green down in here. I'm evenly twisting as I'm mixing, I'm twisting the brush. Check out this color against here. A little more ochre. That's too deep, I can tell from experience. All right, and I want this foaminess along the edge. So irregular again, always irregular. Now that doesn't look very good, does it? But what are we going to do with this? We're going to skim it across because it's where the foam and the water and the sand all meet together. I want to wet this, blend that leading edge. You notice I'm not adding more paint, I'm just adding water. I'm letting my brush skip across the surface of the paper, drag across the surface in other places. This line is not good, but look, all I have to do is touch it with a wet brush and it breaks it up. I don't have to fiddle with it too much. I'm just playing with it. Play with it. It's just so much fun. Squint down, see what that looks like. That's the wrong color. Get a little more warmth here. Yeah. And up into this area. I'm going to have a little of that sand show under the edge of the water here. I'm just skimming across that top of the texture of the paper again. This is all too white. It's looking pretty good, and I think it's pretty much overall dry enough now that I can come in with some clear water, clear spray on the underside of that foam. Boy, that came out. I am too close. I was way too close to the paper on that. I'm going to blot this quickly and step way back and spray from a distance. That way the droplets fall on there in a more irregular pattern. And I want this to be lighter. I just want some light areas in this. Even in the foam, there's shadows even in the foam. Skipping across to become very even there. Blot it a little bit, see what it looks like. This sky area, I don't like too much. What am I going to do with that? I don't like the shape of the foam. This doesn't seem natural. If this wave is coming this way, and before I do that, I want to add a little more depth down in here, just to break this up. That looks a little better. The foam wouldn't go so high. It's not hitting up against a rock. It's just, I need the foam to be more here. Now we've already put the sky in, so how are we going to do that? We kind of have to go over the sky again with a glaze. I'm going to basically wet the whole sky area because this is fairly dry. make a shape that I want in this area, and I'm going to kind of put a glaze across that sky area. Remember we had basically the cerulean blue and a little pink. Check it out, looks pretty good. Check where we just added some water. And I can very quickly and easily change the shape of the edge of that. The shape of that edge of that wave. I'm just, with this very light paint, just dropping in here. I am also slightly scrubbing as I do this to get rid of that first edge. I want this down more. And then we'll just kind of blend it into the rest with just clear water. And that will just pull some of that over. See how that's changed the shape of that wave? It's nicer. Still needs a little more darkness back here. I'm just kind of touching the water and letting that bleed out. Bleed is just blossom out. So it kind of spreads out. I touched the paper right there. I touched that wet paint. It's going to blossom up. What do I do about that? I can take the edge of my paper towel. This is bothering me. But I can take the edge of my paper towel, get a straight line where it's fairly dry. That looks pretty good. Kind of a straight line of the paper towel. Hold it right against that horizon and press it down. Hold it so it absorbs the paint. Lift it up. Boom! Blossom's gone. A lot of painting is problem solving, and we need to keep an eye on what's going on, what the paint has decided to do. This is kind of fun. I'm seeing a little too much of what's happening up here. I want that to disappear a little bit more into the sky. So, dropping in paint and blending it across. Being careful of that edge again, because I just messed it up before and I don't want to have to fix it again. Leaving a little hint of dryness between the sky and the sea there. Yeah, that helps that blend in a little bit more. Now I need to wait for this to totally dry so I can put in my birds. I'm pretty much done. We don't want to mess it too much. We don't want to play with it too much. I'm going to try blotting that, softening that area right there a little bit. Yeah, that looks a little better. We'll let it dry and come back to it again. As this has been drying, I took a step back and I think that the contrast here is too much the same, the contrast back here. So I've tried to make a decision. Do I lighten this a bit or here, or do I add more green here? So what I've decided to do, as I grab a paper towel, is I'm going to lighten the sea in the background, and I'm going to add a little more green into this to pull this and warm it, to pull it forward. By warming, remember, cool recedes and warm advances. That's a general rule. So here I'm going to lift some of this. Right now I'm just putting clear water on this area. And then I'm going to clean my brush It's a clean brush. It's damp, so it acts like a sponge. And I'm going to lift across. See, by allowing that paint to soften a bit, it picks up quite easily. Again, clean your brush so it's just damp but clean. And I think right here it's still a little contrasty. I'm going to blot that. Just a quick blot. This paper towel has texture, so I have to come back over it. And now to do the same on the other side. In a minute. It's picking up on it, it's catching on the edge, so I'll just blot that a little bit. And I lightly and slowly work it until it looks like what I want it to. That's a little better. Yeah, that's more in the distance. Now to make the other side work as well, I dampen it with just wet brush. I have to come in this way because I did that. So the tip of my brush is cleaning right, it's right on the edge against that wave. Clean the brush off. Let's try to pick up some of that horizon. I'm going to take this damp, clean brush, drag it across and twist it as I lift. Ooh, this is not lifting as well. Same here. Again, it's catching on the edge of the paper. I'll just lift that with a paper towel. Watch that texture. Step back at a distance. I have two different values in that back C. I need to add a little bit more back into this one, just a little bit more. So it's connecting with what's over that way. It's funny, it looks like my horizon line has gone crooked, so I'm going to double check that, and it's not, it's still straight. I have a glob of paint right here. I can lightly, while it's still wet, kind of try to pick that up. If it doesn't pick up, I'm going to leave it. Oh, it did pick up. I would leave it until it's dried. Now I want to add a little more green in the foreground of the wave. That's a lot of green. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to glaze. Glazing is just taking some very thin paint, very transparent, and just lightly skimming across. And you can't do it too many times because as soon as I lay this down, this green paint, it's going to soften the paint that's under it. So if I keep working it, it's going to move that old paint around. So now let's check the color of that. It's pretty dark. I want it even lighter. Glaze just across here. It's not working. My first stroke and I realize it's not working. I'm going to get a larger brush. First time I've picked up my flat wash brush in this painting. By putting this green on, it is separating the water that's in the foreground to the water that's in the distant ocean. Doesn't take much, but just enough. Watch these edges I did with a flat brush. I am now using the very corner tip of that brush just to skip across and make it a little more irregular. I'm going to now lift a little bit if I can. Yeah. See how just I wiped off my brush, clean it, dry it a bit, and try to pick up some of this paint just to add a little variety and value. There. Now I'm almost ready to add in my birds. Now, if you're not comfortable with birds or any object, I don't think this is the brush I want. I think I want this brush. You want to practice it, preferably on a piece of scrap watercolor paper, but right now I just have this printing paper. So if I look, I'm going to do a large bird, kind of use some of my burnt umber. I've got plenty of my ultramarine blue here. By combining these two, I'm going to get a nice dark without using black. But I'm making it thicker. Notice how thin the wash is here. We talked about this. This is a thin wash with a lot of water, and this is much thicker with a lot more pigment in it than water. Actually, this is nice and dark right here. I'm going to use this. All right, so I'm thinking of the bird, and if I were going to do it larger, it would be like basically a triangle shape. Just touching the brush to the paper creates that nice triangle for the body, and then going the other direction. Sorry you can't see, but I will try to get it so you can see. I'm going to just touch again, but in a smaller shape for the head. That's enough to make a bird. I think his beak is a little long for this type of bird, but that's okay. And then different birds press, and here a little, because it's the back of his head, just a little circle. Just that indicates birds, and then later we'll get a very way up on the tip of the brush to create legs. That one didn't come out very good. He's got a broken leg. But now we want it much smaller. We're going to put it here. These birds are too big for this. So we're going to do the same thing, but not press as deeply. We're just going to press in a small amount like this. A little triangle that way, a little dot for the head, another little triangle this way, a little dot for the head. So we make them smaller. This is not a bird, but when we add a couple more details later on, you'll see that the mind and the eye pick it up as a bird. I need to move my painting slightly. I hope it's in the thing. Yep. Because my palette's, I'll move the palette more. Okay. So we'll put a little guy right here. Make a decision. You've practiced. If you're not comfortable, practice again. Dot there, little head. Little dot over here at a different angle, head at a different angle. Little dot. I'm going to turn the brush, triangle at a different angle. Oh, that kind of got blobby, didn't it? We'll put another guy right beside him. Keep changing the angle. These birds are all standing at different directions. If you need to, pick up your paper, turn the whole paper. Why not? It's still wet up here, so I'm trying to stay away from that. Smaller because it's more distant. Notice I'm propping my other hand to hold that brush still. Maybe this guy's got his head down. He's looking at food on the ground. They're all rather dark. I mean, I got a good dark, but it's almost too dark, so I can take one of my paper towels that's kind of damp and just blot here and there, just to vary and make sure it's clean. You don't want to, where I picked up some paint, I don't want to blot that again. I have to find a clean spot and blot. Then I can take the very tip of my brush, and I want this quite dry. I want it dry brush. I'm going to, if you notice, I'm removing a lot of the wetness, not at the tip of the brush, but in the fat part of the brush. I'm blotting it so it dries that out a bit. I want to check how much is in there. Looking pretty good. Now I can add some legs. Can draw it down from the body out to the side. I need a little more paint just on the very, very tip of this brush. Just on the very tip. I'm trying to keep my brush out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. Little guy here, need a little more paint. Tip, tip, only the tip. And we can do kind of the same thing with a beak. Just a little line to indicate the beak. Keep it simple. Don't make a big deal out of it. Now we know if there's birds sitting on the sand, we need what? We need a shadow. So I am going to kind of wet underneath them and add a little bit of paint. Now I need to check. Okay, it's just a little light shadow. And I just touch that wet spot and it creates a shadow without me trying to draw it all out specifically. In a moment, I'm going to come back in when this is dry. I am going to take one of my acrylic brushes and add some lines in here, a little more detail on the birds, and then basically it's done. I might add some birds flying in the sky as well, but I do need to wait for this to dry a bit. But anyway, it's coming along. Hope you're having fun. Okay, let's add some details. I don't want to put, this is the golden acrylic titanium white paint. It is acrylic, so I do not want to get this on my palette or it will stay on the palette forever. Let's close it up. Notice I wiped off for the cap. I need a small brush. With a little bit of soap in it so it doesn't absorb this. Ah, here it is. I prepared this while I was away. So these little birds, I want some white bellies on them. But I don't want it to be white because, you know, I don't want them to be taking all the attention. I just want to indicate that here and there's a little white belly and a little white ring around their neck, because that's the type of bird they are. If you mess up, just leave it alone. People won't probably even notice these little birds until halfway through their viewing of the painting. Yeah. And then I want to just dampen this a little bit, make it a little thinner. Again, on the tip of the brush, I'm going to blot it on the sponge to get some of the water out of there. And I'm going to create some of those lines that come down through the wave as it's washing up over. I'm going to back off on my brush, make it very loose. It's not quite wet enough. A little more water. Thin out the paint. These you need to think about. You can't just draw them. You have to think, where is this water flowing? How is it moving up the wave? I'm keeping way, way up on the tip of my brush to bring these in. Connect this one down. Bring it across. Remind yourself not too much of a good thing, because this can get too fun. It can get too fun. And then it's too much on the painting. I'm going to let these kind of skip a little bit. More water. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. I want to give this guy a little whiter belly. So I'm just going to pick up some of the paint and just touch it there. Yeah, it looks better. The last thing I'd like to do, clean out that brush so I can use it again, is get my toothbrush over here and create some texture in the sand. I'm just going to pick up some paint that's already on my palette, some of this darker stuff here, and kind of sprinkle across. Remember, if you're not comfortable with this, practice on a scrap piece first. I can also do this with the acrylic white. First thing I'll do after I'm done with, when I turn off my video, is go and wash this card off, because I do use it for multiple things. Plus my thumb. I am getting acrylic paint under my thumb. A little fuzz up here as that foam sprays across. Irregular patterns, always keep it irregular in nature. So that's very, very simple way of creating texture without doing all these little hand dots, you know, dot, 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 dot. And it's much more natural way of doing it. They fall naturally and it works very nicely. Yeah. Okay, I think we're pretty much there. I hope you, when you try this, have a little bit of fun. Oh gosh, I just dribbled on my painting. Quick touch with a paper towel. Ta-da! Magic, it's gone. Have fun while you're doing it. You can always try it again. It's good to try things multiple times. I'm just adding a little extra spray here. Yeah, good to try things multiple times. Because you know what? Fun is the best thing to have. Oh, wait, one more thing. I'm gonna have to go clean this off pretty quickly, but I talked about birds in the distance. This is dry, yes. Couple flying, oop, that's a thicker brush. Let's see, what number is this? Nope, that's 5. Make sure your pen is clean. Check it out. Okay. I've got a dot here. I'm just going to make that into a bird. Another little dot over here. Let's bring some birds down into the distance. They're coming down into the seashore to meet up with their friends. This guy's kind of having a good time as well. Okay, this guy's bigger because he's closer. There, just a couple flying birds coming down to join us. There's some other buddies off in the distance, just little marks. Have fun and show me what you do.